All right. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome. My name is Corey Passons. I'm here with Interfaith Works. I serve the organization as the program manager for Interfaith Relations. And welcome to Lean In Olympia. This is a live bi-weekly show airing on the second and fourth Tuesdays of the month. It's a show that features conversations at the crossroads of humanity, justice, and belief. And if you want to check out past episodes, we've just updated the website with all of our past episodes in the last couple of days. You can see all of the Lean in Olympia episodes that we've done, and that's at interfaith-works.org. So please check those out. You're here on Facebook Live with us, and we'll also be posting this on our YouTube channel. Welcome. It's my joy today to welcome our guest, Jerry Zehr. He's an ordained minister and has served as a pastor and leader in interfaith ministries for over 30 years. Hello, Jerry.
Hello there. Good to be with you.
Good Namaste. To be with you. Namaste. Yeah. I'm going to read a little bit from your website just to give folks a bit of a context, and then we're going to turn it back to you to verify how true or how true today everything is of those, and you can share more about your story. There's always more to our story. But from your website, you've helped to create 4 interfaith organizations, including the Carmel Interfaith Alliance and the Indiana Multi-Faith Network. We should note that you are joining us today from out of state, from outside of Indianapolis. Is that correct?
Yes, Carmel, Indiana.
Carmel, great. You've been married for 37 years with 2 daughters and 2 grandchildren. Jerry leads workshops, retreats, and speaks at events on different aspects of these are themes of walking the enlightened path, developing inner peace, learning to forgive, building understandings of different faith traditions. Jerry went into ministry after a career as an actor, and we can talk more about that from your bio. So thank you for letting us delve into your story through on your website bio. And is there anything else you'd like to share with us about your story? And then in particular, we'll move to aspects of your story that led you toward the work of ministry and interfaith.
Yeah, I think that does it well. I did say in there, but I grew up with Amish grandparents. I grew up as Mennonite, so very kind of conservative, narrow background, legalistic, but some wonderful things about the Amish. And that was the beginning of my roots up in northern Indiana. But I think that will carry on into the rest of our conversation too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And so you grew up in Indiana. When did you, from an Amish family, yet you had a career in entertainment and acting? I don't think, at least for me, I associate like a large percentage of Amish people going toward the entertainment industry. Can you share about how you moved from that place to?
Well, yeah, in reality, my parents were already moved to be Mennonite. My father grew up as an Amish, but
I see.
He left the Amish and his father, to his credit, always still welcomed him back into the Amish community. Mm-hmm. But he wanted more for his life. He had a vision and saw that he wanted more in life itself. And it's interesting because my brother was in theater. He owned a dinner theater, and we talked about how did we both come into doing, movies, entertainment, all that. When you come out of a Mennonite, in the Mennonite tradition, you couldn't dance, couldn't smoke, couldn't do anything. Theater was looked as in a negative way. But maybe because my mother's family they were very musical. They played guitar and piano and that type of thing. So, but anyhow, yeah, we kind of unusual, but my novel, Blurring the Lines, is a novel, but it's based on my experiences leaving kind of that conservative background, going out to LA, like I did when I was 23 years old, very naive, but, and then my experience of meeting people of different cultures and faiths and finding my own way to my own spiritual awakening. Because when I went out at 23, I disconnected from the church, because I'd never bought into that conservative kind of mindset, but I didn't have any way to talk about God in a much broader way until I went to seminary.
Mm. Yeah, and let's also pause for a moment and kind of broaden the context of why we're talking today. Jerry, you're an author. You've done work with a lot of work with interfaith collaboration and writing. I see your book in the background, which we're going to talk about a little later. So just wanted to share with our audience some of the ways and the reasons why we're talking today. I really appreciate your long, outstanding commitment to interfaith collaboration and work. And I have a question for you. Oh,
yeah.
go ahead.
No, please.
I have a question for you, kind of coming back to the narrative of your story with your work in the entertainment industry. We had a guest on a few months ago, a pastor who also had a background in theater and mime. And I had a question for her I'd like to pose to you. What did exploring your own artistic and creative and self in the context of theater, what did that unlock for you or help you deepen in your own spiritual journey?
That's a great question. And I do think that music, art, dance, poetry, paintings, all give expressions of that deeper part of ourself. And that was what I found as I loved poetry and I sang with music and musicals and drama, that some powerful plays, powerful musicals connect us to the deepest parts of ourself. And when you're watching that movie or you're reading that novel or book, it helps us to engage our imagination and something within ourselves. And so that's the beauty, isn't it, of I think of storytelling in many different aspects or forms.
Yeah, it is. There is that ineffable aspect that art seeks to give form to. That it's and in the religious sphere, we talk about this in the language of the mystics.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is tapping into the deeper questions within all of us that sometimes we think nobody else has these questions, and so I don't ask them. But sometimes the deepest questions of our heart or our feelings of guilt and shame, this is what I was leaning towards, is that I left that conservative background because there was a lot of guilt and shame to it. And I went to church camp, and I had experienced the love of God at church camp with people from all different places. And so when my minister, I'd go back home and the minister would say, you're going to go to hell if you don't believe like us, and those Catholics and Baptists, let alone Hindus and Buddhists, we're going to go to hell. And I just never bought it. I just couldn't believe God was going to damn 3/4 of the world to hell because they didn't believe like we did. And so I left that background. And I think a lot of times people disengage because maybe of their upbringing. What I'm so thankful is that I was able to find a faith community where I could ask those questions and I could explore. And I realized later in life that God was much bigger than just one church. And that's what I wanted to help people maybe who've turned away from God or turned away from their spiritual, searchings and yearnings, to say, because of your bad experience or something that happened, don't turn that away, because there's many other avenues on the journey of enlightenment and spiritual journey we come to.
So when was this moment where you were starting to re-engage and find your own identity, your own root of meaning in the tradition? When was that approximately?
Well, when I was in the entertainment business, what I found was every relationship was transactional. What can you do for me? How can I move up the ladder? And even though I was performing on stage, inside I was very empty. I was doing nothing really to feeding or to focus on my own personal growth, my own spiritual development. And that happened when I finally, I was teaching. I left LA, kind of got out of the theater scene because it was very destructive. And I felt like I was always, the question I was always being asked, what are you willing to sell your soul for? Because I was having to be confronted with doing things that I didn't really feel comfortable with doing, or doing drugs at parties that I didn't want to, but to get to know other people, or there were many things happening. And so I got out of that for my own sanity, and I ended up teaching high school speech and theater. And I came into a church. It was a Christian church, Disciples of Christ, which is very connected to the United Church of Christ that I know you grow out of. And that was a progressive Christian tradition that allowed me to ask questions. And I saw men and women in leadership roles. And that was just so like, gave me hope again, and gave me a connection with God, because I heard about God's love for the first time rather than about the judgment of God.
Yeah. Yeah. What happened in you when you felt safe to ask those most pressing questions about the divine?
Boy, I appreciate your word, feeling safe, because I think that is so important, that we can have a community or have a place where we can ask questions and we won't be mocked or chastised, but in fact, encouraged, because I think the asking of the questions is sometimes as valuable as finding an answer. In fact, the older I get, the less I feel like I understand, maybe, and I'm on the journey together. But I think having that safe place gave me hope and gave me some joy with finding a connection with God again. And that's when I realized, we talk about loving others, and Christians and other faith traditions are good about that sense of compassion. But until we can love ourselves, when they asked Jesus, what was the greatest commandment? He said, love God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. But we aren't very good about loving ourselves. And I found out, part of my thing was because I was trying to live in other people's expectations. Society was telling me it's not enough. You need this, you need that. And so I always felt inadequate. And even though, I started to believe that God loved me, I, at the core, didn't feel I was really lovable. And until I started realizing and claiming that and absorbing that and letting that come in and celebrating the good things about myself and not focusing on the things that I might feel of my past that I was a failure at. That's when I started loving myself and getting that sense of inner peace and connection with the divine.
Yeah, let's begin to move toward your work in interfaith. And one of the things I want to just name as you're telling us about this, and thank you for sharing about your process, I've found in my experience that many people who come to appreciate interfaith, they have done some of this wrestling that you're talking about, where they've gone through a process or a journey, even a dark night, if you will, to really come to a place where they can have a sense of authority in naming their own place in the choir of celebration for their tradition. And I find that most people who appreciate interfaith have had some kind of process where they've been needing to claim that for themselves and find their own identity. Yeah.
I think you're right, because I think for a lot of us, maybe we have family members who are more conservative, or we grew up in a certain way and we just didn't buy it. And then so until we finally claimed, and they have their point of view and I can respect that and love them, but this is who I am. And I see God in a much bigger way. That then begins the whole opening up, right? Of experiencing God and some new experiences. Yeah.
And so new experiences, indeed. Let's move toward your book, and let's use that. It's a recent book. It was published in August, just this last year. I mean, there's lots more in your story that we could talk about, but I want to move towards the book and use that as a lens to talk about interfaith work. The book is the Peacemakers Path: Multi-Faith Reflections to Deepen Your Spirituality. It's available on Amazon and other booksellers. And just a brief intro of what the book is. The Peacemakers Path brings together wisdom from the world's major religious traditions, including Baha'i, Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Jainism, Judaism, Native American spiritualities, Sikhism, Taoism, and Zoroastrianism, showing that we have much more in common than what divides us. And there are other books that do this, but your book makes sure that each of these reflections, there are 40 of them, highlights and shows a specific passage from scripture. So you get to experience the kind of the founding texts from that tradition and encounter that might not be from your own heritage or from your own experience, but you get to at least see something that's definitive from that tradition, and then do some reflection on it in an interfaith capacity.
Yes, and that's what I grew so much as I wrote this, kind of a labor of love for 2 years, because I had to study these scriptures that I never really read. The Quran, I never read the Hindu scriptures or Baha'i scriptures or the Sikh scriptures and from Baha'u'llah, and the teacher that came from the Baha'i scriptures, or the Sikh scriptures are mainly in Punjabi, but then the translation in English. And so as I researched those, I wanted to give people that same experience of with a theme of forgiveness and reading, oh, wow, Buddha's teachings on forgiveness and Baha'u'llah's teaching on this are the teachings of from the Upanishads in the Hindu tradition. And then when you saw that same stream, kind of that, stream that kind of connects all these great wisdom teachers, it gave me a deepening of my own understanding of God, but also of these different aspects of themes of spirituality.
Yeah, and I appreciate you naming that idea of this word God, but then also themes of spirituality. And some people might live in that phrase of spirituality, but not have a connection with this word.
Exactly, because whether we call it God or higher power or love, these spiritual themes and these teachings of these great teachers are really about how we live life here on earth, how we feel the abundance and can come to an enjoyment of this, what we experience here. And so I've had people who are agnostic, like my book, because the teachings are really about our own life together. And as I speak about the divine within, some might understand that as that center of themselves or love. But what I wanted to do was to give kind of practical teachings on patience, on listening, on punishment or forgiveness, karma, the walking in the enlightened path. These were different themes that I took 40 of these different aspects and then to write a reflection so that you could give something to think about, then with the scriptures, and then a prayer from a faith leader. The idea was that somebody could read this for 40 days, could do it one a day, kind of as 15 minutes, or read it through themselves. So, it was a labor of love.
It's you mentioned some language around a stream that runs through, and I think you have even language talking about shared core values. But let's investigate that for a minute and ask about what's the difference between shared core values and not being the same.
Well, I think that's really part of what we come to appreciate as we get to know people of other faith traditions or other cultures. It's coming with some humility that I don't have all the truth, or my faith, my religion doesn't have all the truth. We can't grasp the whole infinite of the universe. And when we see these teachings in different ways, so like in Hinduism and Buddhism, they talk about karma. Well, Jesus says you reap what you sow. That same core value of what you put out there, you will get back. Now, they play that out more in even their reincarnation, and they see that coming out and working out. where Jesus speaks about it in your actions and where you are. But we see that theme of cause and effect, karma, you reap what you sow, from different great teachers, but a little different in how they talk about it. But we see the core value there.
Yeah, because what I appreciate about the book is that it does present us with the texts themselves. And what texts do is that they shine a light that an author is intuiting or experiencing in their spirituality, but they also show us a particular time and a place. They reveal a culture and a space and a time in history. So when we come to these scriptures, we have kind of a twofold obligation. One is to ask, what is the wisdom that's kind of emanating through these words? And also, how can I appreciate and really respect that this is from a specific time and culture, which may or likely may not be the same as my own?
And what's amazing to me is that these come thousands of years apart from each other, from different parts of the world, from in India, from the Hindu, and Jesus is in the Middle East. We're different time periods, and they didn't have Facebook, they didn't have internet to read each other. So the writings in India, probably Jesus never even heard of, right, of Buddha's teachings, but they see these themes, which reinforces in me that there's a universal consciousness or a universal wisdom, something beyond myself that is trying to give us this wisdom and insight into our life as a human and the spiritual journey we're on.
Yeah. Earlier, a couple minutes ago, you mentioned you made a kind of a confession that my own, tradition doesn't have all the answers. And I don't know if you're speaking, globally or universally, for all traditions to be able to say that, but to say that's a door that not every person practicing every tradition is ready to open and to say as they walk towards interfaith.
Right. I think you're right. And it's part of our own development. Dr. Fowler has a stages of faith development that I share in the beginning of my book, where some people get stuck or stay at certain places. And, I have relatives who grew up in northern Indiana, stayed in that small town, have lived there their whole life. And so their worldview is much different than I've traveled to India and Europe and been traveled and met people of different faiths. And I think those experiences open us up, right? And encourage us to rethink. And if you stay in one place and, you sometimes you don't have that same openness. So I think our own development is there. And I think that's the work you're doing. And the real joy for me is when we see people of all faith traditions who, we could always find what we disagree with. I can tell you things I don't like about the Catholic Church. I don't like about, Islam or this or that. But when we join together, the power of love, the power of people joining in a way of goodness is so powerful and magical.
Yeah. You mentioned love, and I'm thinking, Archbishop Desmond Tutu just passed, a great leader and also a great advocate for love across and beyond religious identities. I'm thinking of the famous relationship that the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu had together, just a jovial love and a free expression and appreciation for each other. What an example for how to appreciate and to care for another person who is, when you think of the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, they are firmly ensconced in their traditions. They are global leaders for, Christian and Buddhist teachings and traditions, yet they were able to have a fluid and ongoing and really respectful dialogue on the global stage for decades.
Well, and I think what I've appreciated as a person out of the Christian tradition, I've realized that the teaching to Jesus at the very core are very universal and very connected to all of humanity. I think churches the Christian, the institution has made it exclusive and tried to do some things for different reasons. I think many people in positions of power can use religion, to put across their path. So religion has been used in some bad ways, but I always say don't blame God because of human beings kind of immaturity or our own sin. Yeah. And that's the power of love, is that it transcends, and it doesn't just transcend religious, it transcends political. It transcends those things that we see in our society. We're polarized, and we have a hard time of conversations between people of different points of view because people are so angry. And when we can start to have empathy and maybe start to have some compassion for the other person and listen and care more about them as a human being than their point of view or my point of view, we can see this healing come again.
Yeah, empathy and compassion, those are dynamics that we are in dire need of these days.
We do. And I realize, as I say, because the pandemic has heightened our own frustration and anxiety, things in the political arena, and especially with TV, I tell a lot of my folks to quit watching too much of TV, right? Don't watch all the talk shows, because they're trying to hype the news. They're trying to hype the thing for sensational for their ratings, but that's secondary to the relationships. And so you have to watch what you feed in your brain. I mean, you have to watch what are you going to read? What are you going to take in, and what's going to stay within your mind, because how that affects you is how you will affect others.
Yeah. We talked last week, and we spoke about the polarization that's occurring in our civic lives, and you are a longtime faith and religious leader, and yet what you're doing right now is you're naming how religious traditions and spiritualities can actually serve to bolster polarization, even in a congregation. But they can kind of be these dynamics behind the lines between people as they come into conflict with each other politically too.
Yeah. And one of the things I was the proudest of in my congregation was we had people who voted for Trump and people who voted for Hillary. And we were intentional about being respectful. And I had some friends who were very, wanted me to speak from the pulpit against Trump in different ways. And I said, I'm not going to do it. I'll speak about issues of immigration or racism, but, to name somebody and then to speak destructively or diminishing of that person does no good. And so on both sides, when people were doing that, that doesn't help the process and help the building of peace are wanting to bring some healing to our world. And I was so pleased and that we had conversations on immigration, and we had conversations with people from different political points of view, and we actually find common ground. We found things that we agreed with. We didn't, not on everything, but again, I want to encourage people, and that's why if they read the book, it will help them, I think, have an appreciation for somebody maybe who they don't know much about, a Muslim, they don't know much about the Sikh, and by reading the book, it will give them some appreciation for these people of other faith traditions that will help them to have respect and maybe even appreciate and to have conversation then with our neighbors.
Yeah, because I think what I hear you saying is that it takes a little bit of work to get to know a person outside of one's own background and culture, and that statement might point to a little bit of some of my frustration with some of the existing polarization that's happening. Is that it also really, I think, reveals that there's oftentimes just a lack of effort for people to extend, beyond what they know and the communities or the cultures that form them, and to try to step into another culture or another tradition and to learn about it. It takes some work, and if until you're making some mistakes, you might not be trying it yet.
Well, and there is so much good that's happening in so many with people in our country, but it doesn't get picked up by the media because they only pick up the bad. There's this website called Good News Network, and it's one of my favorite websites. I go to, every week just to read the stories around the world in the United States of people doing these wonderful acts of generosity and forgiveness and building bridges. And that I really believe that the polarization that we feel is actually heightened with the media. But if we, in our regular communities, I think people really do still care and are respectful. And the majority of people want to find ways of joining together.
Mm-hmm. So the book that we were talking about today, the Peacemakers Path, what are in the book? Do you promote any specific techniques or examples of peacemaking? We've talked about how the book features scriptures and reflections so that people can actually do this work we were talking about of extending beyond themselves and getting into the specifics of another tradition, saying, wow, this is from this heritage, and I can be in front of this and respect it. But do you talk beyond that about any, sociological techniques or community techniques about peacemaking?
Well, I really have focused on the peacemaking part on the individual. So like about listening and empathy, and helping people to explore that the difference of hearing and listening. The difference of just having empathy and then having generosity and how we can then take things into action. And so I do give them 3 questions to reflect on and then a call to action. So my hope is that it will help people on an individual, but if some groups want to use it kind of as a study, which it has that, because each week I kind of have a day of reflection and review. So there have been some churches or faith communities who've done it, or a study group who's done it where they've individually read each week and then come together. And I think, you can do that. I think some of the things you're doing with the homeless and providing and joining together with the different faith groups, doing an action is what can even change a lot of the community. When they put swastikas on the temple here in Carmel, happened on a Thursday, we just through social media said we're having a service on Monday night of solidarity. The temple only held 350 people. And on that night at 7:00, when, 7 p.m., most people want to stay at home. It's night, it's cold. We had almost 1,000 people. The place was filled, people in the parking lot. And people from all different faiths, people who were agnostic or atheist, but who said, we stand together in solidarity, in a oneness for respect for humanity. And that ripple effect that happened there had such a great ripple effect into the rest of Indianapolis, that other things that happened that I shared with you later that were great things, that when we can step out of our own comfort zone and find ways of engaging, it has a powerful effect.
Yeah, I think that being embodied, working together toward a common cause is a really powerful and energizing thing. And it's something that we've suffered from lack of that during the pandemic, this freeness to gather. And right now we're in another moment where there's, with Omicron and there's just a lot of hesitancy to do these very basic things like gather in a way that feels free. We recently had a gathering of solidarity for the Islamic Center of Olympia when there was an explosive device that was detonated at the walkway leading up to the mosque. And Interfaith Works was part of a group to mobilize people who gathered together and showed solidarity for the Friday prayers. And we were wearing masks. We were outside, but we were still wearing masks and distancing to try to protect each other. So we we experience the joy of solidarity together and the purpose of solidarity. And yet we were also in a moment where we weren't fully free yet to be revealed with our full faces, our smiles, and to feel like there was full embrace. And so it's a both and moment.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, and I tell some of those experiences in the book, and also, more than just even the scriptures, I also have some of the poetry from the different faith traditions, like Rumi, who's a great Sufi, a Native American, and some of their prayers, Chief Seattle's, some of his quotes. And so it is more than just scripture, because I think poetry, writings, paintings, these are all expressions of our humanness. And that's what I want to encourage people. I hope that as they read it, people have said it gives them a sense of inner peace and hope for finding some sense of peacemaking in our world.
Well, I appreciate and I recognize that each person is a contributor as an individual. We all are individuals, and yet we also are made full in community, and we function most powerfully and meaningfully when we're associated with community. So you mentioned that your book is focused on individual reflections, but that those are easily adaptable towards expressions of community, which eventually, as faith and spiritual leaders, is what we're all about.
Yes, that is, and that's what I hope. And I think we realize, community is something you have to work at, and it's an investment, and it's going to be interesting with the pandemic, because I think many faith communities have seen that sense of people, being separate from one another, and yet we yearn. I think the more that I have been in community, the better I am as a human being. And it goes against the grain, because some of us, it's better to be on Zoom and stay in my house in my pajamas. So to get out and to engage with people, causes something, but I am so much deeper as a human being out of relationships. And so I think, that will be important for people to find their ways of finding community again.
Yeah. And one thing I've noticed sort of offhand in our conversation is that when you and I have been talking about community, I don't think yet that either of us have limited that definition to religious belonging.
Right.
And especially maybe, in the Pacific Northwest compared to Indiana, we are the land of the nuns, NONES. So that means we have a highest percentage in the nation in this area of unaffiliated persons with traditional religious institutions. Yet in your work, I've seen you recognize spirituality existing in every human, and that community, even I would say spiritual community, is not limited by any stretch of the imagination to traditional religious identity.
And I think, that this group of my kids are that. They say they're spiritual but not religious. They don't participate in any institutional religious ways, but both of my daughters practice in some way their own sense of their spirituality, and they finding community. And I think that that will be part of the journey. The thing that I value about a spiritual community, I can explore and ask some of the questions, the deeper questions in my life, rather than, if I'm a part of the Kiwanis or part of the Royal, some group that does good things. But I appreciate being a part of a group where I can pray and I can ask questions and I can grow together. That's why, you have this interfaith community that you worship. And I think how neat that is. And I think there are going to be more groups like that for people who do value the different faith traditions, but want to celebrate all of those. And can we do that in a way of community?
Yeah, there's no one answer to that. I think that interfaith is as it's moving from maybe traditionally mid 20th century, like the realm of the professional academics and an exchange of ideas, as it moves into shared practices, blended communities, communities that are postmodern and that aren't even necessarily defined by labels, but have a spiritual intention, and they reference different religious scriptures or objects. All of this is in play and in flux.
It is what I appreciate about in writing of the book, because even though I am a very universalist and broad in my understanding of God, by reading the scriptures of all these different faith traditions, it gives me some groundedness. It gives me some rootedness in that journey of our own human consciousness. Mm-hmm. And we have others who will do great writings and bring new revelations of understanding as science and spirituality come together. We are certainly growing in that way, but these feel, because they're so core, and they were, again, you saw these written over periods of time. It reinforces in me kind of the universal truths, if you will. And I think there are some universal truths for me that I see, resounding over and over again. And they're all framework around love, are some aspects of love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we are tasked with making manifest examples of these ancient wisdoms over and over again, each and every day. Yeah. Jerry, as we begin to wrap up, I was wondering if you've mentioned the word hope a number of times in our conversation today. I was wondering if you would venture to give us a definition of how do you understand hope?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Hope for me is the feeling of that there's something better, something exciting and wonderful that I'm living into. The promise that I've had in my life when I've had difficult times and difficult challenges. I mean, there were some times when I was ready to quit ministry. There were times when I felt like a failure and I was ready to give up. But there was something inside of me that knew I had gotten through those difficult times because I'd felt a sense of love of God and of others who surrounded me, who believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself, that gave me a sense of hope for something that was coming ahead of me. And then I lived into it. And you live into that and you go, see, there is something here that I'm learning and growing into. And so I hope for some of your folks, maybe that are listeners today, that if they're feeling a sense of despair, or maybe don't have a sense of hope right now, look back on your life and see that you've overcame some difficult times and how you came through those and now where you are today. And believe that the power of love that sustains us and brings us into our future is God's desire for all of us.
Well, thank you for that. I really appreciate those final words and that encouragement in these times when it can seem like the setbacks can be piling up. So I really appreciate that final word. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. And thank you for the work you're doing. And for all your folks who are listeners, and if somebody, wants to reach out to me, they can go to my website, jerryzehr.com, and you can reach out to me there. And I'd love to hear conversations as people are maybe reading the book, and I'd love to hear some feedback from people.
Great. Well, we'll link to your website and to the book. So thanks again to our guest today, Reverend Jerry Zehr, for joining us on this episode of Lean in Olympia, all the way from Indianapolis. We appreciate, or for Carmel, Indiana. Thank you for being here today. And again, thanks to all of you for joining us today for this episode of Lean in Olympia. And you can check out past episodes on our website. We'll have this one posted in the coming days. You can find this on our Facebook page and also on our YouTube channel in the coming day or so. So again, thank you all for being here. Peace to you and have a great rest of your day.